Welcome to Paranormal Northwest, a podcast all about the history and the paranormal of the Pacific Northwest. Join me as I tell stories of this great region, the history, the people who live here, and those who may have never left. As always, thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. I enjoy sharing the history and stories of the Pacific Northwest and hope that you enjoy learning about it too. With every episode, I feel that I uncover new information about places or stories I already knew. If anything, it may help add to your fun facts list. So join me today as we travel to the Salish Sea and the San Juan Islands and visit Roche Harbor, Washington. Join me as we check into the Hotel De Haro. So grab your sweater, your blanket, and a cup of tea, and let's get started. The Hotel De Haro is located in Roche Harbor, Washington, within the beautiful San Juan Islands. The San Juan Islands, located in the Salish Sea between mainland Washington state and Vancouver Island in British Columbia, have a rich and fascinating history shaped by indigenous cultures, European exploration, boundary disputes, and settlement. As with all of the areas of the Pacific Northwest we look at, they have a long, rich history that predates Euro-American interference. The San Juan Islands are the traditional homelands of many of the Coast Salish peoples. The Coast Salish peoples refers to not a single group or tribe, but rather a language family. This language family includes 24 distinct languages and different dialects. For more than 10,000 years, the San Juan Islands were home to Coast Salish peoples, including the Lummi, Samish, Swinomish, and Songhees tribes. They lived in seasonal villages, harvesting fish, particularly salmon, shellfish, and even marine mammals. The islands were integral to their way of life, serving as fishing grounds, seasonal camps, and sacred sites. The territory of Coast Salish people stretches from the Salish Sea, including the San Juan Islands, Puget Sound, and the Georgia Strait, across southwestern British Columbia and much of western Washington state. East Coast Salish Nation has unique traditions, languages, and histories, but they share deep cultural and spiritual connections to the land, waters, and animals of the region. The first Europeans to explore the region were the Spanish, starting in the late 1700s. This exploration was part of Spain's broader efforts to assert sovereignty over the Pacific Northwest. During this period, Spain and other European powers, particularly Britain and later the United States, were vying for control of this strategically valuable region. By the late 1700s, Spain had already established a significant colonial presence along the west coast of the Americas, from Mexico to present-day California. However, Spain sought to expand its influence even further north to counter British and Russian exploration. Spain sent numerous expeditions to chart the coastline, establish territorial claims, and strengthen its maritime presence in the region. The Pacific Northwest, with its many protected waterways, abundant resources, and indigenous trade networks, held strategic and economic value. The first significant Spanish exploration of the San Juan Islands occurred in 1791, led by Francisco de Eliza, a Spanish naval officer and explorer. Eliza and his crew aboard the San Carlos conducted detailed surveys of the waters around what is now known as the Salish Sea. They charted the San Juan Islands, giving many of the islands and waterways Spanish names. For example, San Juan Island was named after St. John the Baptist, San Juan Bautista, a common Spanish naming convention. The Strait of Juan de Fuca, to the south, had already been named after a Greek navigator, Juan de Fuca, who claimed to have explored the area under a Spanish flag in 1592. During their voyages, the Spanish encountered Coast Salish peoples who had lived in the region for thousands of years already. The interactions were generally peaceful, though the Spanish presence represented the beginning of European encroachment into indigenous lands. The Spanish expeditions collected geographic, biological, and navigational data, contributing to the understanding of the region's waters and terrain. While Francisco de Eliza had led a larger expedition, Jose Maria Narvaez, a skilled pilot under Eliza, conducted further exploration and was one of the first Europeans to explore Boundary Bay and the surrounding waters around present-day Vancouver, British Columbia. Narvaez's efforts added to the mapping of the area, improving navigational knowledge. Another member of de Eliza's expedition, Captain Gonzalo Lopez de Haro, was a Spanish naval officer and explorer during the late 18th century, who played a key role in Spain's effort to map and assert sovereignty over the Pacific Northwest, including the waters around present-day British Columbia and the San Juan Islands. In 1790, Lopez de Haro commanded the San Carlos, a Spanish ship sent to explore and survey the coastline of what is now the Salish Sea and the surrounding island archipelagos. During this voyage, Haro and his crew became some of the first Europeans to survey key waterways and islands. It's believed that Lopez de Haro's work contributed to the naming of certain features in the region. For instance, Haro Strait, the prominent channel that separates the San Juan Islands from Vancouver Island, is named in his honor. Today, the Haro Strait remains an important waterway in the Pacific Northwest. It serves as a critical shipping channel and a central feature of the San Juan Islands region. The strait later became a focal point during the Pig War between the United States and Britain, as both nations debated where the boundary line between the San Juan Islands and Vancouver Island should lie. Don't worry, we'll get to the Pig War. He is also the namesake of the Hotel De Haro. The Spanish left a significant imprint on the Pacific Northwest, including the San Juan Islands, through place names and early mapping. More examples include San Juan Island, Strait of Juan de Fuca, Güemes Island, named for the Viceroy of New Spain, Jean Vincent de Guemes. I probably did not say that right. And Cypress Island. Though Spanish influence in the region was relatively short-lived, these names remain a lasting reminder of Spain's exploration and aspirations in the area. British exploration and eventual influence in the San Juan Islands were part of Britain's broader ambitions in the Pacific Northwest during the late 18th and 19th centuries. Driven by competition with Spain, Russia, and later the United States, British explorers, fur traders, and settlers played a key role in the history of the islands. While I've gone extensively into British exploration in previous episodes, see especially episode 1, Fort Vancouver, I'll do a quick recap. In 1792, Captain George Vancouver, a British Royal Navy officer, conducted one of the most significant British explorations of the Salish Sea and the surrounding region. Vancouver's expedition was part of a larger mission to survey the Pacific Northwest and strengthen British claims to the area, particularly in response to Spanish exploration. Some of Vancouver's key contributions were his detailed mapping that his crew meticulously charted the waterways and islands of the region, including the San Juan Islands. There are also many geographic features named after Vancouver or some of his naval officers, friends, and other places, such as Mount Baker, which is named for crew member Joseph Baker, and most notably Puget Sound, named for Peter Puget, a member of Vancouver's crew. Vancouver's maps became foundational for future explorers, fur traders, and settlers from all nations. The British Hudson's Bay Company was a powerful fur trading enterprise and expanded its operations into the Pacific Northwest in the early 19th century. The region's rich resources, including sea otters and other furs, drew traders to the San Juan Islands. The Hudson's Bay Company established posts and stations throughout the region, including on Vancouver Island and the nearby mainland. Although no permanent Hudson's Bay Company trading post existed in the islands, the company regularly used the San Juan archipelago for grazing livestock, hunting, and resource gathering. The British began to establish a presence in the area, which set the stage for disputes with American settlers. Side note, while many, especially those outside the Pacific Northwest, may not be as acutely aware of early Pacific Northwest history as I am, I want to give another little bit of greater historical context before discussing the British and American tensions in the region. When Lewis and Clark set out for the Pacific Northwest in 1804, Thomas Jefferson was president. Thomas Jefferson, who was the United States ambassador to France during the American Revolution and wrote the Declaration of Independence. At that time, the peace between the two nations was tenuous at best. Our cousins in the Atlantic Northeast have similar historical stories of conflicts with the British along their border. As the 19th century grew, tensions between the two nations increased, leading to the War of 1812 and further decades of unease. It was not until after the Civil War, nearly a century after the American Revolution, that relations between the United States and Great Britain became more friendly than not, and that even was tested during the Industrial Revolution. All this to say, the Pacific Northwest was a faraway, distant land from the politics of Washington, D.C. and London. Out here, a simple dispute among neighbors may have been akin to a declaration of war between the two nations. Two nations who were both eager to claim the land as their own for political and economic gain. Also to note, during this period of history, Oregon refers to the entirety of what is now the Pacific Northwest, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, as well as what became Montana and Wyoming. So now, on to the Oregon Treaty and the Pig War. In 1818, the U.S. and British agreed to a joint occupation of the Oregon country, where citizens of both nations could settle and trade freely. Originally only meant to last 10 years, the joint occupation treaty lasted for almost 30 years. This arrangement was meant to be temporary, but tensions grew as American settlers increasingly migrated west along the Oregon Trail in the 1840s. The Hudson's Bay Company still had a stronghold in the region, with forts and outposts spread throughout the Pacific Northwest, including at Fort Vancouver on the Columbia River. This was Britain's foothold to maintaining their dominance over the fur trade in the 1800s. Without the Oregon Territory, or more specifically, the resources it provided, Britain was looking at a massive economic downfall. During the 1820s and 30s, American settlement in the Oregon Territory grew astronomically. Thousands of Americans began to settle in the lush areas of the Pacific Northwest, along the Puget Sound, the Columbia, and within the lush Willamette Valley. It was there that an illegal government began to form. The intent of this provisional government was to control the path of Oregon statehood. Up until this point, while Americans settled both to the south and the north of the Columbia River, Britain still held control, technically, over what is now Washington state. By the mid-1840s, tensions between Britain and the United States were rising. American expansionists adopted the slogan 5440 or fight, referring to the latitude line 5440 degrees north, which marked the southern boundary of Russia and Alaska. This implied they would claim all of the Oregon country or fight Britain for it. This was further encouraged by then American President John Tyler, claiming that the American claim extended to the 5440 latitude line, the present-day American-Canadian border. Through the first half of the 1840s, the Pacific Northwest was gearing for war. Tensions were high among British Hudson's Bay Company and the American settlers. However, Tyler's successor, President James K. Polk, while initially supportive of this aggressive stance, recognized the risk of war with Britain, especially as the United States was already preparing for conflict with Mexico over Texas. At that time, the United States could not afford one war, let alone two on both sides of its border. In 1846, both nations agreed to a truce, and talk of war subsided. In the spring of that year, the Hudson's Bay Company moved their headquarters from Fort Vancouver to Victoria on Vancouver Island. Another sidebar. Yes, it's confusing to everyone who lives here that both Washington State and British Columbia have many of the same place names. Vancouver, Washington is located along the Columbia River across from Portland, Oregon, while Vancouver, British Columbia is located across the Canadian border. Victoria, British Columbia is located on Vancouver Island, which is north of the Puget Sound and the Salish Sea along the western coast. Everyone just really likes George Vancouver. The key terms of the Oregon Treaty were as follows. The treaty established the 49th parallel as the boundary between British and American territory from the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific Ocean. This extended the boundary that had already been set further east in the Treaty of 1818. Britain retained Vancouver Island, south of the 49th parallel, as it was home to British settlers and the Hudson's Bay Company's base at Fort Victoria. The treaty allowed both nations to navigate shared waterways, such as the Strait of Juan de Fuca, without obstruction. The treaty allowed for unimpeded American settlement in the Oregon Territory, which led to the rapid migration via the Oregon Trail. In 1848, the United States formally established the Oregon Territory, further solidifying its claim. While the Hudson's Bay Company continued operations in the Pacific Northwest for a time, the Oregon Treaty marked the beginning of Britain's retreat from the region. However, the failure to clearly define ownership of the San Juan Islands left a lingering dispute between the U.S. and Britain, culminating in the peaceful resolution of the Pig War in 1859. Don't worry, we're getting to the Pig War. Britain shifted its focus to developing its North American territories in Canada, particularly British Columbia, which was formally established in 1858. The Oregon Treaty of 1846 was a major diplomatic achievement that helped avert war between the United States and Britain. By establishing the 49th parallel as the boundary, it shaped the modern map of the Pacific Northwest. While it resolved most disputes, its ambiguity regarding the San Juan Islands would resurface decades later. Now, finally, we arrive at the pig war, which actually does have a pig involved. Remember how earlier I mentioned that Pacific Northwest was far removed from civil society, that tensions were constantly high, and everyone was ready to fight? Well, even so, the Pig War of 1859 was a unique and bloodless conflict between the United States and Great Britain over the ownership of the San Juan Islands. It was triggered by the shooting of a pig, but reflected deeper tensions arising from unresolved territorial boundaries in the Oregon Treaty of 1846. Because of the vagueness of the Oregon Treaty, two key waterways, the Haro Strait, favored by the U.S., and the Rosario Strait, favored by Britain, created ambiguity. Both nations claimed sovereignty over the San Juan Islands. By the 1850s, the San Juan Islands were inhabited by both Americans and British. The American settlers, encouraged by the United States, had begun farming on the islands, while the Hudson's Bay Company used the islands to raise livestock, particularly pigs and sheep. Integral to the British claim to the island was the Bellevue Sheep Farm. This farm cemented the Hudson's Bay Company on the island. The Hudson's Bay Company employed both indigenous people of the region, but also an influx of Kanakas, native Hawaiians who traveled from the islands to the Pacific Northwest with the Hudson's Bay Company. This cohabitation created tension, as both sides viewed the island as their own. The incident. Shooting the pig. On June 15, 1859, the conflict began with a seemingly trivial event. Lyman Cutler, an American settler, discovered a pig rooting in his potato field on San Juan Island. The pig belonged to Charles Griffin, a Hudson's Bay Company employee who managed livestock on the island. Cutler, frustrated by repeated damage to his crops, shot and killed the pig. Griffin demanded $100 for the pig, quite a significant sum at the time. Cutler refused, claiming the pig was trespassing. This small dispute quickly escalated into an international incident. After local American settlers appealed for protection, U.S. Army Captain George Pickett, later a Confederate general in the Civil War, we won't fault him for that though, was dispatched with a small force to San Juan Island. Pickett declared the island American territory, saying, "We'll make a Bunker Hill of it." Bunker Hill, while an American defeat in the American Revolution, was significant in that it essentially showed how scrappy and willing to get dirty the Americans were. The British, led by Admiral Robert Baines of the Royal Navy, responded by sending 3 warships to the waters off San Juan Island. British forces considered landing Marines, but Admiral Baines wisely refused to escalate the situation. For weeks, both sides engaged in a standoff, with American soldiers and British warships eyeing each other cautiously. Despite the tension, no shots were fired, and the only casualty remained the pig. Cooler heads prevailed as U.S. and British officials sought to avoid armed conflict. Both sides agreed to a joint military occupation of San Juan Island until a permanent boundary could be determined. American and British forces established camps on opposite ends of the island, living peacefully alongside each other. Soldiers from both nations reportedly even held joint social events and played games together. The boundary dispute remained unresolved for 12 years, until international arbitration was sought. In 1871, the United States and Great Britain agreed to let Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany arbitrate the dispute. In 1872, Kaiser Wilhelm ruled in favor of the United States, establishing the Haro Strait as the official boundary. This decision awarded the San Juan Islands to the United States. British forces peacefully withdrew, and the boundary between the U.S. and Canada was permanently settled. After the resolution of the boundary dispute, American homesteaders arrived, engaging in farming, logging, and fishing. The surrounding waters supported salmon fishing and canneries, which became vital industries in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Fertile soils allowed for apple, pear, and other fruit orchards, many of which remain today. In the mid-20th century, tourism began to replace industry as a dominant economic force. The island's natural beauty attracted visitors for recreation, boating, and wildlife observation. Environmental efforts grew as the importance of preserving the San Juan Islands ecosystem, which is home to orcas, seals, bald eagles, and even more, became apparent. In 2013, President Barack Obama designated parts of the islands as national monument, protecting their unique cultural and natural resources. Today, the San Juan Islands are known for their idyllic scenery, outdoor recreation, and vibrant local communities. They are a popular destination for kayaking, whale watching, hiking, and exploring charming towns like Friday Harbor. The islands remain a treasured part of the Pacific Northwest, rich in history and natural beauty. The number of named islands that encompass the San Juans is 176. However, the number of exposed land masses not named or only accessible at low tide is around 700. Roche Harbor is located on San Juan Island along the northwest side of the island. Prior to the Pig War, the British quarried and processed limestone near Roche Harbor. Throughout the first part of the 19th century and into the Pig War, the San Juans were recognized for their vast lime resources. However, it wasn't until 1872, after the boundary was established, that Americans began to create kilns on Roche Harbor and mine the abundant lime there. The story of Roche Harbor cannot be told without telling the story of John S. McMillan. McMillan was born in Indiana in 1855, but spent the majority of his life and career in the Pacific Northwest. He was a prominent businessman, lawyer, and visionary industrialist, best known for transforming Roche Harbor into a thriving lime manufacturing center and later a unique historical destination. His life reflects a combination of business acumen, civic engagement, and deep philosophical and spiritual interests. Born in Indiana in 1855, McMillan trained as a lawyer, earning a law degree from DePaul University. He practiced law before transitioning into business ventures, recognizing the demand for construction materials as the Pacific Northwest rapidly developed. He moved to Tacoma in 1882 and began to work in the lime industry in the Puyallup Valley. He established the Tacoma Lime Company in 1883. Also in 1883, he purchased the established Roche Harbor Lime Works operation and established the Tacoma and Roche Harbor Lime Company. McMillan lived until 1936 and grew not only the lime industry but Roche Harbor itself. When McMillan took over the lime operations on Roche Harbor, the operation was only beginning. In 2 years, he expanded operations greatly, taking the production from 2 kilns to 5 kilns. He also constructed many new production buildings and warehouses on the island, as well as expanding the wharfs and quarries. By the mid-1890s, McMillan had taken the operation from producing 8,000 barrels of lime annually to producing nearly 150,000 barrels annually. 150,000. Yeah, I know. I said that right. The increased lime production also contributed to technological developments in the area. New kiln and barrel technology was engineered to better serve the lime works. The company had a fleet of ships called the Roche Harbor Lime Transport. These ships traveled up and down the west coast. This was very dangerous, as quick lime that becomes wet can be very combustible. In fact, one of the ships, the William G. Irwin, was scuttled or sunk in San Francisco in 1926 after unsuccessfully attempting to put out a fire on the ship for a month. The company lost approximately $30,000 worth of lime. That's over $500,000 in 2025. As the Pacific Northwest grew, the fire danger grew as well. While timber was abundant, the seasonal wildfires and timber construction proved disastrous to growing settlements. The burgeoning cities of the area began to build not with timber, but with brick. These brick structures were held together with lime mortar. As the cities of Seattle, Tacoma, Spokane, and Portland grew, so did the demand for lime. As with many industries in somewhat isolated areas, Roche Harbor grew into a company town. The workers attracted to the lime works were from all over. Chinese, Japanese, Scandinavian, and Russian men came to work in the area. Many of them began to settle, and the town grew beyond the lime works. The area to the north of the town became known as Japantown. The town of Roche Harbor also continued to grow to accommodate the families of the workers. There was a post office, store, church, school, and a doctor's office. In fact, Hotel De Haro was initially used as a boarding house and mess hall. As the lime industry continued to flourish, so did Roche Harbor and the San Juan Islands. McMillan became involved in politics while insisting that his workers voted his way. If they didn't, they were fired. As Roche Harbor was a company town, this was problematic. Initially, the workers were paid in script. That was only good at the company store along the dock. However, they were later able to request cash instead. While Roche Harbor itself is a lasting legacy to John McMillan, he intentionally left a visual legacy. Known today as Afterglow Vista, McMillan designed a mausoleum for himself and his family on the island. The mausoleum is the final resting place for McMillan, his wife, and his children, as well as one other, but we'll learn about her later. The open-air rotunda houses 6 chairs around a limestone table. At the time of its completion in 1936, it cost about $30,000, nearly $700,000 in today's money. Also, for greater historical context, that was smack dab in the middle of the Great Depression. McMillan's son canceled additional work on the mausoleum, possibly not only for the monetary cost, but the cost of public perception as well. Once the lime quarries had been exhausted, it seemed that Roche Harbor would either slowly dry up or become another sleepy little island town. In 1856, the Tart family purchased approximately 4,000 acres along the coast. Their vision was to turn the industrial ghost town into a thriving seasonal resort, a boatel. They restored many of the original Limeworks buildings, including the Hotel De Haro, 2 of the McMillan residences, the workers' cottages, and even the wharf building. They also added new docks, condos, and other resort amenities such as a pool and tennis courts. The Tart family built up the seasonal resort for over 30 years before selling it to the Coman family in 1988. Since then, the Coman family has expanded Roche Harbor, now known as the Roche Harbor Resort, into a year-round resort town. To keep up with the sailing and boating community that thrived in the San Juan Islands, the Comans upgraded the marina to an astonishing 387 slips. Today, Roche Harbor Resort is a seaside village year-round. The Hotel De Haro was built by John McMillan in 1886 to host visiting line company guests and customers. And fun fact, the Hotel De Haro is Washington's oldest continuously operated hotel. The building was constructed as a 20-room hotel, built around the original Hudson's Bay bunkhouse. The bunkhouse had been built well, and the McMillan building took advantage of the sturdy 1 foot thick wooden walls that remained. Some of these logs are still visible today. Over the years, the hotel has been renovated and additional buildings added. Today, you can take a step back in time and stay at the hotel, which has rooms sharing a bathroom, just like they would have 140 years ago when the hotel was built. While I started the research on this episode with the assumption that I would only be looking into paranormal instances at the Hotel De Haro, it soon became apparent that such a small area with so much history would hold so many stories. For instance, the McMillan McMillan Mausoleum, Afterglow Vista, sits in a wooded area. It is aptly named as the entire structure appears to glow during sunset. However, guests to the site have reported seeing floating blue orbs hovering over the limestone table and even hearing disembodied voices at the site. Some have even reported seeing shadows sitting in the chairs. There are even oddities that visitors note never encountering others on the trail or even at the site. Despite it being a designated attraction, it's part of the National Park Service. One specific story about the mausoleum revolves around a woman named Ada. I saw conflicting reports that said Ada was either a servant or a governess for the McMillan family. When the Tarts started renovating after their 1956 purchase, they found an urn containing Ada's ashes. They eventually had the ashes entombed at the mausoleum. She is the only non-McMillan to rest there. However, unlike the members of the McMillan family who rest there, her ashes were not placed under her name. Some think this may be the reason she is reportedly spotted wandering the buildings of Roche Harbor, many of which are still the same ones she traveled in her life. Reports of seeing Ada in the Hotel De Haro have also been connected to doors opening on their own, appliances turning on and off, and even items in the storeroom moving on their own. Some have even noted hearing the sound of clothing rustling when no one else is there. While Ada and the mysterious blue orbs seem to be enjoying the resort as much as the other guests, they don't appear to be harmful at all. Thank you for joining me as we explored another amazing area of the Pacific Northwest. If you have stories of your own to share, follow me on social media at ParaNWPod and message or comment on the post. Also, check out our merch. We have a few different designs to represent your favorite aspect of the paranormal Pacific Northwest. Until next time, bye.